I'd like to acknowledge that this episode of the Teach New South Wales podcast was recorded on the homelands of the Darug people. I'd like to pay respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today. Welcome to the Teach New South Wales podcast, a podcast by teachers for teachers. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Teach New South Wales podcast. You're joined again by your host. I'm Siobhan, and joined with Shannon.
Hello.
We're very excited today to welcome Deb Summerhayes to the couch. Welcome, Deb.
Thank you.
Over Deb's vast career in education, she has worked as a teacher, head teacher, principal, executive director, just to name a few, across southwestern and western Sydney schools. Deb is now the Deputy Secretary of New South Wales Public Schools, and we're so delighted today as she joins us to talk all things public education and provide advice, insights and inspiration to our future teacher pipeline. So welcome again, Deb, to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Tall order indeed.
Well, Deb, before we dive right into it, we love to do a bit of an icebreaker.
Okay.
Very fitting to warm up our guests. So our first one I have for you today, what are you reading, watching or listening to at the moment?
Okay. So I'm currently watching the beginning of Severance.
Shannon was just saying she's about to start watching it.
It's a slow burn,
Okay.
but episode 1 of the first season was a slow burn. Very popular in my house with my 3 sons and my husband and I.
Nice.
What am I reading? I'm currently reading The Prophet, almost finished. Excellent book, Booker Prize winner. Unfortunately, I love reading, but in this job, all of the reading I do most of the year is professional reading.
Yeah.
So holiday time is when I try to read other things. I'm an English teacher, so I love to read, and it's anything I can get. My big pile beside the bed is quite tall, waiting for holiday time. What am I listening to? Well, I'm listening to Bob Dylan because I went to see Timothy Chalamet, who was just fabulous, in a film about Bob, and so I've been listening to Dylan.
Fantastic.
Amazing. We're Timothy Chalamet fans.
I know. I tell my younger son he
Hilarious.
looks like Timothy Chalamet, and he just goes, "Mum, really seriously." Yeah. So
Well, I grew up in a Bob Dylan household.
well, there you go.
Definitely need to watch that. I might bring Dad along.
Yeah, not a great singer, but beautiful lyrics, right? He's a
Yeah.
poet, and it was the film was very, very good, very well done.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Good tip. Now, our next one I have for you, and this is actually my favorite question of what we have. If you could go to dinner with any influential person, dead or alive, who would it be? And it can be someone fictional as well.
Wow, that's a really hard question. Because there's so many people I would
Okay.
love to meet and be able to speak with. I think it would be amazing to be able to speak with someone like Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
There are too many.
I know. You feel rude, don't you?
need to
Like,
choose. You do.
excluding the other.
Like, how do I choose my favourite? And sometimes I think it would be really interesting to go to dinner with someone that I find quite, difficult to engage with, to understand the thinking. So let's say Nelson Mandela.
Okay.
Nice.
And you might have a dinner party. There might be.
I would absolutely have a dinner party. I'm a big cook. I'm always cooking for lots of people.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. Now, last one I have. What's one tip or tool that you think every early career teacher should know about?
That's a really good one. I think every early career teacher should know that bring your authentic self to the table and you will find the journey much more meaningful and much more powerful and much more successful. But there are ways that we need to do that when we're establishing ourselves in school communities.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
excellent.
Great advice.
And I'm sure we can go into that a
Yeah.
little more as we get closer on into the podcast. But can we sort of take it back to your journey? I would love to know why you chose teaching first and foremost. I think that's an important question.
Sure. So, look, I feel really fortunate because teaching's always been a vocation for me. It was always something that I wanted to do. I'm the product of an outstanding public school education. I attended East Hills Public School and East Hills Girls High School. I had parents who weren't afforded the luxury of good education. They both had to leave school when they were quite young, working class kids from inner city. And so they always encouraged their kids to be as well educated as possible. So I had encouragement at home. I had wonderful teachers who taught me about high expectation and aspiration and what was possible. And I'm very grateful to each and every one of them every day. And I'm so daggy, I can still name all of them too. And I always wanted to be a teacher. So when I got a pretty good HSC, I loved school. I took advantage of everything that was on offer. I did band and choir and debating and public speaking and volleyball and anything the school offered. I would have a go. Got involved in leadership at school and really wanted to be a teacher. And when I got my HSC results, they were good, and that was lovely. And I went home to my dad, the truck driver, who said, come on, Deb, you want to do teaching, go to uni and do something where you're going to be paid much better, where you're going to have more respect. And I was like, Dad, I really want to do this thing. And it probably wasn't until I became a principal that my dad said, you know what, you absolutely chose the right profession. What you do really makes a difference.
Yeah.
So I feel very lucky because I knew I always wanted to be a teacher. I lived the transformation that's possible through public education, and I really wanted to make that difference for other kids, which is why I've always chosen to work in Sydney, Southwest and Western Sydney. Yeah.
Fantastic. I imagine along your way you may have had people who either a teacher or a colleague or someone who had an impact on you or had influence over your journey and made a lasting impression on you. Is there one memory that comes to mind?
I was taught by outstanding teachers because they came to the space in the late 70s and early 80s where a lot of people were able to go to university because of the Whitlam government policy around education. So lots of really clever working class kids went to university. Lots of them became teachers and they went out and taught in our schools. So they taught about social justice and about history and the importance of community. And that was what I really took from my teachers. And I was taught by a real variety. Margaret Mashford was my history teacher. She's no longer with us. And she was a really conservative, very formal dressed lady, but her thinking about the world and her provocation to women to say that you can be wives and mothers, of course, and that's amazing, but you can also be plumbers and teachers and doctors and lawyers and anything you want to be. And my school principal, Margaret Oldfield, also no longer with us, was very powerful in that space. She would stand up in front of a hall of 900 women in the late 70s and early 80s and say to them, you know what, you have options. And in those days, that was quite a radical thing.
Yeah.
And really wonderful for all of the women, young women who sat in that hall at that time. I had a fantastic English teacher, Gary Heap, who really encouraged my love of English. I became an English history teacher, though I taught English and drama mostly when I was at school. And just so many teachers that I took different things from in their lessons. A science teacher that always made me laugh, a maths teacher that probably didn't help my dislike of maths for many years in education. We have all sorts of different experiences, but people that were really dedicated to opening up the minds of the young people that they worked with.
How lucky we are, I suppose, to be able to, and any conversation I would hope you have with someone, they could all name a teacher that's had the same powerful impact on them.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And when I talk to a lot of my ex-students I run into, and I look exactly the same, short, round, Bob, but just getting older. And they will stop me on the street or they'll find me in a playground. It's amazing where people run into me and they will say, oh, Miss, remember when we did this in class, or Miss, remember this excursion, or Miss, remember this person. And I love that about my job, and I love that I get to see the product of it because I'm very fortunate in this role to go to schools across the state.
Yeah.
And I run into people I know all the time who share stories, and I think it's a wonderful thing about being a teacher. You don't always know on the day the difference that you make, but you should never question it because you absolutely do. And you often find out years later and had no idea at all.
Yes,
Yeah.
I totally resonate with that. Like even because I'm a primary school teacher and I'd, wave goodbye to them in year 6 and then a couple of years later they'd come back from high school. In year 10, they're so tall. They're like a complete little human out in the world.
It's
like, wow.
I have 3 sons, and when they all left high school, I didn't just thank their high school teachers. I made a point of thanking the teachers that had them in primary school because they contributed to that journey of learning for those boys at different times and meant important things to them at different times, because the journey for a young person in our system starts in preschool and it's a 13-year plus journey of strong public education. And so I'm always really grateful to everyone that contributes to that story, whether that's a contribution that's, really confronted a child on the way they think, nurtured a child, challenged a child. The thing I love about teachers are all sorts of different people go into teaching. There aren't too many professions where you can have an absolute right-wing and an absolute left-wing person sitting in the same staff room working really well together because they have a love of education. And I think it's great for kids to be exposed to all different kinds of people in their own learning journey, because then they can connect and resonate with different people at different times, and that's really important too.
And that's society, you know.
Absolutely.
We're raising that next generation who are going into our workforce,
Yeah.
which is a multitude of different personalities and
Absolutely.
different backgrounds. People come from
Yeah.
all walks of life. So
Yeah.
I think that's a great thing to celebrate about
I
our
agree.
schools.
And that's the beauty of public education, right? I talk all the time about we are a really diverse and complex system, but it's the beauty of our system that makes us so diverse and complex. Regardless of your socioeconomic background, your religious background, the language you speak, your ability, your gender preference or orientation, you come across our threshold, we welcome you, we wrap around you, we do our best to educate you and take care of you. And we show you a world that mirrors the world you're going to go into. And I think that's really important. I don't believe in rarefied environments for developing whole human beings. And the great thing about public education is that it is diverse, and that diversity brings complexity with it. But when children leave us, they've experienced the world they're going to move into with the skills they're going to need to navigate the world they're going to live in, we hope, as best we can. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Great societies are built on strong public education systems.
100%. And sort of that philosophy that you built in your journey of public education and the way you're sort of telling it to us now is so inspirational. I also wonder, where you are now sitting in that deputy secretary role, how was your leadership style or vision sort of developed as you progressed through your career? I'd be interested to hear.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I always say to people, it's sort of like imperfect, incidental leadership in some kind of a way, though the way I do my work is really deliberate. I feel very privileged to have this role, and I admire people who sit down and say, in 5 years' time, I'm going to do this, or in 3 years' time, I'm going to do this. I really acknowledge that is a way lots of people look at their career. For me, I loved being in the classroom, and I never would have left if someone hadn't tapped me on the shoulder and said, do you mind relieving in this position? We need someone. And my whole career was sort of like that, almost to DepSec level. It's pretty similar. And I feel very privileged and very lucky that I've had those opportunities. And each time I decided to move, it was because I would relieve or have the experience and think to myself, oh, I can help here. I can add value here. I can do something that might help more children, more teachers, more schools. And so that is sort of how I felt I landed here after, 35 years plus in public education. But the great privilege of my job now is 2,219 schools. I get to visit students and teachers and leaders in school communities across New South Wales. They are all different. They are all contextualised. They are reflections of their own communities. And it's an enormous privilege to be able to work to improve the learning and life outcomes of 800,000 children and young people.
Yeah. And that's really, I'd love to dive a bit more into that because, as the Deputy Secretary of Public Schools, overseeing that many students and having that, monumental responsibility, what specific initiatives are you most proud of in this role now?
Okay, we're doing some really great work. And I remember when I got this job, I rang my mum and dad, very wise people. And I said to my mum, this is a really big job. And my mum said to me, Deb, everything you do is big. This is just another kind of bigness. And I remember that on those days where I'm thinking about 800,000 children. I don't make a decision in my job without thinking about the impact on 800,000 children, 95,000 teachers, 40,000 leaders. They are constantly at the table with me, which I think is really important in every conversation and decision that I have and make. And it's all big. No matter what you do, you have to go in with your heart and you have to go in and make it big and make it good and powerful for the people that you serve. And I think that the work that we're currently doing in New South Wales public schools about really looking at good teaching, explicit teaching practice, because we know that works for all kids. Whether they require adjustment or extension, we know that explicit teaching practices will help children learn better. So that's a no-brainer for me. We're very committed to the high potential gifted education work because a rising tide does lift all ships, and identifying 4 domains of learning, which just isn't about the academic. Young people come to the table with potential in the social emotional domain, the physical domain, the creative domain, and the intellectual domain. And it's our job as educators to find that potential and help that young person understand their own potential and grow that potential. And the work we're doing in HPGE, we are seeing kids in all classrooms where that explicit teaching is being used improve, which is fantastic. And I think our big focus on equity and excellence goes without saying. It's the moral purpose of the work I do and that we do every day. And it's really great to have those 3 things that we are deeply focused on when there's all the other things that feed into that and out of that. Schools are saying to me all the time, we love the fact we're staying the course on the 3 big things and we're making sure that all the other bits we do sit here and make sense here. And I'm really hopeful for green shoots this year around the work that started last year.
Beautiful. I'm still trying to get over the fact that you ring your mum for advice daily, and it makes me feel really makes me feel seen and heard. It's like, oh my gosh.
She's the most sensible person I know, and she knows me really well.
Yeah.
And I do sit with that, and I do share that with people all the time, you know, and I think it's a really nice reminder, because sometimes we all go into things, our first teaching job, our first leadership job, and we often think we're not enough. Have I got what it takes? And that's why I always say to people, you be your authentic self, determine that you're going to act with moral purpose, serve the folks you've signed up to serve, and do the best that you can. But it's all big, right? Different bigness.
Definitely. Quite clearly, you're known for your passion for education, but also from what we know of you and have looked into a little bit about you is your commitment to equity. I'd love to hear your sort of stance on this equity piece and your commitment to bringing equity and driving equitable outcomes for all to the forefront.
Yes. Look, to me, that is the absolute central focus of everything we do in public education. A postcode should not determine your learning or life outcomes, and it's our job to make sure that every student, whether they attend a school in Boggabilla or Ballina or Balmain, has a quality education. And we need to work hard to make sure that is possible, because across the state it can look very different based on geography and all sorts of things. And it's really hard as a big system to be able to cater for everyone, but that is the reason that we do what we do, and it's important. It's always an objective of ours. So for me, equity is ensuring that everybody gets what they need to be able to get the best out of their education. And I do talk all the time about just not improving learning outcomes, but life outcomes. That's what we're here to do. We want to be able to support young people to be knowledgeable and caring, informed, capable citizens of the future. Do we always succeed? Well, no, because societies are complex places. But we want every student that attends a New South Wales public school to have those foundational experiences and opportunities and learning activities that can help them get ready for the world. And increasingly, our young people are facing a world that is even more complex than when I was a young person, was even more complex than when I started teaching. We live in a post-truth world where we have to teach young people how to be critical in how they access information and understand what is truth and what is not. That was not something I had such a challenge with when I was in schools. So as an educator, how do I help young people prepare for that kind of access and quick access to information? But also, how do I help young people understand that there is times where waiting at a bus stop without a phone in your hand is really important, because being able to manage boredom and a bit of challenge and use your imagination is actually a really good thing for all of us in being more creative. So having those conversations with young people about the world that they live in much more deeply than me. Just when you asked me about who I was listening to, and I thought a lot of people on this podcast would go, Bob Dylan, is she serious? But do you know what I mean? I'll share a story with you. My 2 nieces came to visit from Western Australia, and they're 11 and 9. So I spent a lot of time in my car over the holidays singing Pink Pony Club. And when I came back to work, I was singing it, and one of my colleagues went, Deb, I'm surprised you know that song. And we were laughing about...
Is that Chapel Road?
Chapel Road. I had a whole experience of all this sort of new stuff that my little nieces were. We were singing along, and we'd gone to see Wicked, and we were sort of, singing Defying Gravity and all sorts of things at the lights, where people were going, who are these people next door, sort of thing. But I was just thinking about that with the Bob Dylan reference. They go, oh, she's so old. There you go.
No.
As I mentioned, I grew up in a Bob Dylan.
There you go.
Pretty fond of a bit of Bob on the radio every now and again.
I think so too.
It's all part of it.
That's right.
That well-rounded development.
Definitely.
Well, from your bio and from you sharing your experiences, we know that you have extensive leadership experience as well. I suppose I'd love to hear, what advice would you give for our aspiring leaders?
Yeah.
Because a lot of our listeners are pre-service teachers or very early career teachers who, might be thinking that they'd love to be a part of a leadership role and take that leap in the coming years.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your advice.
Yeah. I felt really fortunate. I did all of my teaching as a beginning and early career teacher in the West and Southwestern Sydney, which meant there were lots of young teachers who had access to leadership opportunities quite early, because staffs tended to be a little bit younger and there tended to be quite a lot of turnover. So quite early in your career, you had an opportunity to be a year advisor or to work on bigger projects or to relieve in leadership positions. So I felt that was fortunate. But I think whether you're training to be a teacher or coming into the classroom for the first time or thinking about your career in teaching, it's really important that you take the time to do what you do well. And you take the time, I always call it getting your house in order. Credibility is really important.
Yeah.
So if you want to lead people, you need to be able to show that you really understand the work that they do, that you understand what the day-to-day life of a teacher looks like if you want to lead teachers. And if you want to lead leaders, you need them to understand that you understand what leadership is and what it looks like. I think being able to demonstrate real understanding and credibility in that space is really important. And the thing I love about teachers and educators is they are no nonsense. They are not dazzled by bright and shiny as much as they are dazzled by authenticity and service and people who know what they are on about in the work they are trying to do. Yes, there's difference. Yes, there's difference of opinion. And that's what I love about our job. I love that we can argue and debate and then come up with a decision that's good for kids. I think that's fantastic. But being credible in your leadership is really important. I always say to people, you can't just talk the talk. I mean, I talk all day, but you have to walk the walk and people have to trust you. And if you're leading and there's no one walking behind you, that's not leadership, right? To get followers, people have to buy in and understand what the purpose is. And I feel really lucky because in education, I believe the vast majority of educators share a very, very similar moral purpose. We choose to serve children in schools.
That's really powerful. I suppose by nature, as leaders, you often have a vision. We're visionaries. So I'd be interested to hear from you talking about enacting change. Is there some sort of small incremental change that you see would make an impact on the public school system, or a large scale change that you would like to enact? Is there something that comes to mind?
I think everything we are doing is to remind community about the power of strong quality public education. I want every family to look at their local school and say, whether my child requires adjustment, they're a good sports person, they like to read a book, they need extension, my public school has what they need to thrive and to flourish. And I want people to have faith that the public education system will provide an experience that will prepare young people for the world that they'll inherit when they leave school. And I believe that the work that we do every day should encourage more people back to us after a period of time for lots of reasons: COVID, GFC, flood, famine, dysfunction, hard industrial times, us talking about ourselves in really negative terms, which was a real concern to me because we weren't focusing on the joy of the work. Our job is difficult and it is challenging, but there is so much joy in what we do. So for me, everything that we do is about saying that our system is for everyone. Everyone gets a fair go. Everyone can get what they need to flourish and have choices for their future. And that is the thing that I think drives everything that we do every day.
Nice. So almost like a change in perception of what public education is and what people can bring to public education and the role and value of teachers in society.
Absolutely. Yeah. Rarefied environments, getting a particular education because you pay for it, teaching kids that their own local community is not where you want to be or go to school or share experiences with kids who come from your local community is an interesting challenge for me as a public educator, knowing the great value you get from working in diverse and complex communities. I was the principal of Cranebrook High School, and a very challenging community, but our kids would go out into the world of work and the people in the workplace would always ring and say, Miss Summerhayes, no matter who comes through our door, your kids are so respectful, so polite. They know how to work with people. In my school, we had a unit for children with diverse learning needs. We had a class for students with emotional disturbance and behaviour disorder. We had kids from all different cultures, all different socioeconomic backgrounds. It was a melting pot that reflected the community, and every one of those kids knew exactly how to work with every kind of person, and that was reflected when they're out on work experience and going out into the world of work. And that was just one little example of the great value of what can happen in public schools to prepare you for the world, beyond.
Yeah. And what about for our early career teachers?
Yeah.
How can they thrive when they, sort of step into our schools, both personally and professionally, I suppose? Do you have sort of maybe things that you did or some things that you've seen in both of those domains?
Definitely. So the first thing I would say is every kid in a New South Wales school deserves an expert teacher.
Yeah.
So syllabus. Know your syllabuses, know them well, and start to develop how you will teach them. Start to develop your pedagogy that sits with you in a comfortable space, but is also mindful of things that you see that you think will work, that will make a difference to how kids learn. I still, as an educator, have a very big dilly bag of tricks. And I love that I still go to schools and meet young people and children and think, you'd really test me. What would I take out of my dilly bag to teach you? And I love that lifelong learning is how most teachers come to the gig. And I think that's really important. As a beginning teacher, you need to come in and know your syllabus, be respectful, look around you, look at how others work, look at the culture of a school that you may choose to embrace or want to inform for change. And understand that everyone comes to work, I believe, with an intention to do a good job. I've never met anyone who wakes up and says, today I want to be a bad teacher. Today I want to be a bad leader. But sometimes people don't have great days. Sometimes they're not well suited. There are lots of reasons in a community why we're not always firing 100% all of the time. So being patient and being respectful and understanding that you need to suspend judgment sometimes in the workspace is important. Certainly I learned that it was important with children and families to suspend judgment because it's sometimes hard to get good outcomes if you are judging the folk you're trying to work with to get a good outcome for a child. So I would say to beginning teachers, come in, listen, learn, be positive, contribute, be enthusiastic, don't overextend yourself. Work out what the main game is, which is good syllabus, good teaching practice, knowing your children. You need to know the kids in your class, whether you're a high school teacher or a primary school teacher. I'm a high school teacher. I knew every kid I taught. As a principal, I knew every kid in my school. Some kids better than others, but you need to know the children not just as learners but as human beings. Every child in a New South Wales public school deserves one adult who is their champion. I love it when there are more.
Yeah.
But every teacher needs to know something about the child that's more than them as a learner, because those powerful relationships, particularly in complex classrooms or with kids that don't necessarily love school or love learning very much, you've got to find a way in that's built on mutual respect and deep care. And knowing about kids and being able to talk to kids about more than just English or maths or whatever, I think is really important. The relationship is really important. It doesn't mean that you're the kids' friends. It means that they know you are an adult that cares about them and works hard for them. And sense of humour is incredibly important. Don't be too serious about yourself, because that is
agree more.
That is absolutely a recipe for disaster.
It's actually one thing that pre-service teachers ask us all the time is, how can I, be friendly with the kids but not be their friend a lot of the time?
Really good question.
I can totally understand that that's a hard balance to strike. So any advice to those?
When I first started teaching, it was a bit of a common mantra, and some colleagues will hear it in some schools. Don't smile before the April holidays. Be really serious. Go in, be tough, That just doesn't work for me. I can't do it. If I try to do that, the kids would go, who is this person?
What's wrong with them?
Yeah. So you've got to go in and be authentic, but boundaries are important for children and young people. They respect it.
Yes.
And it is always possible to build those relationships that are still friendly, that are still appropriate, but there is no confusion about the boundary and the relationship. And I think that that takes time. And also in particular settings, I've worked in schools where when you arrive, it's the role of the child in the classroom to test you as much as possible, because sometimes they've had lots of teachers in that classroom. Sometimes they've had leaders that don't stay. They don't expect adults to turn up the next day or be someone they can rely on. So they do test quite a lot. But I find in those communities, once they know you're there and you're committed and you deeply, deeply work with them to get good outcomes, the respect and the support from the kids is amazing, which is why kids will come up to me in the street 20 and 30 years later and want to have a conversation. And I think that's an amazing thing. So it's not about being a friend of the child. It's about being friendly and respectful, always respectful when working with whomever you work with, regardless of what they do or how old they are. But that idea that, there are always boundaries. I still have kids that still call me miss. I still will run into teachers that taught me who are now in their 80s, and I will say, it's lovely to see you, Miss Kenway, and she'll go, just call me Tess. And I think that's really funny.
It feels odd, doesn't it?
It feels really odd, and I force myself to do it, and they laugh and I laugh, but that's okay. That's okay.
Your story of boundaries also forced me to reflect on not a mistake, but a lesson that I learned in my first year, which was through seating plans. I was so scared to enact a seating plan in my class because I thought they're going to hate me. I'm forcing them to sit in a certain way. But then I stopped and reflected in my next year, and I thought, actually, when I come into work each day, I have a car spot that I like to go to, and that's my routine. And so the students that come into my classroom like to know that that's my seat and that's my personal space. So when I reframe reframed my thinking and thought it's actually a boundary and one of safety for them and
Yes.
routine and structure,
Yeah.
then I actually thought, oh, it's not so bad. And so,
Yeah.
you know.
I think that's a really good idea. And in my experience, as I said to you, children and young people like boundaries. They don't always have it in their life outside of school, so that can sometimes be a challenge and a rub. Boundaries, I think, are important, but I think also predictability is really important. Students respond and often will tell me when they talk to me about what works or what doesn't work for them or why they're in trouble. And when you get to the bottom of it, it's often about it's not what I expected. I expect her to do this or I expect him to do this, or normally when I say something like that, he doesn't react, but today he reacted. And that concept of predictability and how kids sort of know what they're getting when they come into a classroom and how you can be really certain about what the rules of engagement are going to be. But you've got to be comfortable in yourself and you've got to work with the kids that you've got. But it's very important that they understand that you are leading the learning in that classroom and they're participating and they have agency and advocacy.
Yeah.
But you're the person who's in charge and there's a reason for that.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And I love how you touched on, sort of reflecting on everyone should have that person in their corner.
Yeah.
Well, at least one.
Really
adult.
important.
And I think when I first got into teaching and I was, finished university out there in the big wide world, ready to tackle my own class, I think a big part of my ethos was reflecting on the teachers who championed me and making sure that I had that at the forefront. I need to champion for these 30 students, for example, and I need to show up each and every day and do that because that's a big part of our system and our public education.
I agree, Shannon.
That.
Yeah, I agree that. And I think the way you show up is really important. I always say to colleagues, certainly leaders in schools or leaders of faculties or leaders of stages, leaders generally in schools, you're not really afforded a bad day. Like you really can't afford to come in and behave in a bad way or you're having a bad day because it does impact on everybody in the school. So you've got to have a silent sort of bad day in some sorts of ways. And we laugh about, of course we all have bad days and because we live in families and we live in community and we are human beings and things happen to us too. But just being mindful about how you turn up does matter.
Yeah.
I led a school in a very disadvantaged area and I believe the way you dress and the way you turn up for kids is really important. And I remember coming to school one day and a young boy said to me, Miss Summerhayes, because I quite like pearls and I had a pearl necklace on, and he said, Miss Summerhayes, you always get so dressed up to come to school. And I said, no, I get dressed for you. And he looked at me and it became a thing in the school. They go, we like the jacket, miss. We like red, you're dressing for us. So it became a thing. Right? But it was saying to the kids, I value you enough to make the effort to be professional.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting everyone wear pearls. I'm not even suggesting the art teacher is wearing a suit when they're trying to put a clay piece in a quilt.
Yeah.
You dress appropriately for the work that you do, absolutely. But that you make an effort and you show up. And I think that's really important because you're teaching kids about when you go out into the world of work, you need to dress appropriately, whether you're working on the McDonald's crew or you're working in an office or you're in a classroom, and you're showing up for the people in the room for you. And it became a bit of a joke and we loved it. And my pearls were always a bit of a joke because I do like pearls. But I think it's important that you do show up and you show that professionalism every day. Even when I was out on the sports carnival the kids used to laugh. They would see me and go, oh, Miss Summerhayes is dressed like a normal person. And that meant it was swimming carnival day and I had on a shift, or it was sports carnival day and I had on jeans and a jumper. And we would laugh about that because that was a normal person. But I think the way you show up, and it's not just about what you wear, and it's just how you come to the table. And sometimes it's okay to say to kids, we're here today, we've got work to do. It's not a great day. There's a whole lot going on in the school, in the family, whatever. So we're just going to work on this today. I've often had classes of kids who would sit quietly because we all knew someone was not having a great day, So it's that relationship and knowing the kids and knowing that, they're there to challenge. They're there to try and sort out their own world by challenging your world, and you become a very important person in the lives of kids, even if you know it or not.
Absolutely. I always remember my very first parent-teacher interviews. You're the topic of conversation every night. And it's so funny because you have this day with them and then you're being spoken about in 30 homes that afternoon, or if you're a high school teacher.
I know.
You're the centre of so much for the students and the constant.
That's true. And often the stuff that we think they will remember, they don't. So if it's okay, I'll share a story with you.
Of course.
So in my first year of teaching, I was so lucky. I was sent to Fairfield High School. At the time, it was the biggest school in the state, 1,700 kids.
Wow.
And it was 99% non-English speaking background communities. We had an IEC, an Intensive English Centre, and lots of students who'd come out of war-torn, at the time, Yugoslavia, Middle East, sadly still war-torn, and Indochina. And so it was this wonderful melting pot of different people, very harmonious school despite all of that, and beautiful children, and a great place to learn my craft as a teacher, because you were challenged and it was diverse and it was complex and there was lots of kids every day. So I felt very, very lucky to be there, and I loved my time at Fairfield High School and worked with some amazing colleagues that are still friends of mine all these years later. But my very first senior English class, I was amazed when I went to Fairfield, which is about 20 k's from Sydney, that in my class there were kids that had never been to the harbour, they'd never been on a ferry, they'd never seen the Harbour Bridge or the Opera House, only in photographs. And I couldn't believe that, because I'd grown up in southwestern Sydney and I'd done all of those things many, many times. So we went on an excursion in the days where English teachers could go on excursions for creative writing purposes. We've moved from there. And we went to Manly and we caught the ferry and we walked around the beach and we looked at the harbour and we did all of that sort of stuff. Many years later, in my executive director role, I was walking across a playground at Fairfield, in a Fairfield school, and a woman came running across. Miss Summerhayes, do you remember me? And this beautiful now woman was a girl in my year 11 class. And she came from a very traditional Slavic family where the boys got all the priority, and she was very clever. And her family wanted to leave school and go to work. And I worked with her family so she could go to university. And she was now the deputy principal of the school.
Oh.
She cried, I cried. It was absolutely beautiful. And she said, Miss, remember the day you took us to Manly? And I said, yeah. And she said, it was so fantastic. We'd never been on a ferry. We'd never seen all those things. And remember, Miss, you let us play in the water, but you told us not to tell anybody. Now, that's really bad advice for a first-year art teacher. Please don't do that. But that's what she remembered, and that's what she talked about. And it was a great reminder to me that it's interesting what memories people take and why they take it. And it was about how it made her feel. And she'd remembered that for 30 years. And so I always say to teachers, you have to be mindful, because you don't know what it is. You know, my kids at school when I was a principal used to often say to me, Miss Summerhayes, you like Miss Jones more than you like Mr. Smith. And I'd say, what makes you say that? I like everybody. Yes, Miss, you do like everybody, but we know when you really like people. And I went to the staff room and thought, they're right. I do like Mr. Smith more than I like Miss Jones. You know, how do they know? Because kids are watching you all the time on playground duty, on your way to the toilet, getting out of your car in the morning, talking to your colleagues in the car park. The kids are watching you all the time and learning about what kind of person you are, not just the persona that comes to the classroom. And that was a beautiful reminder that I have no poker face, A, and B, kids are picking up all the time on what you're doing.
They're little sponges, aren't they?
They are.
I think that's a great segue into what I'd love to ask you next, because you obviously are a huge part of the vision, the future vision for public education. I'd love to hear about, you know, the legacy that you do hope to leave behind in your role.
That's such a big question. When people ask me about legacy, I go, oh gosh, you know. I talk a lot about the importance of coming to any task with intelligence and integrity. I think that's really, really important. But the component for me that is most important is kindness. I think it's really important to approach everything you do with a respect for the people you're working with, even when you don't agree, and sometimes it can be quite adversarial. And I think being kind in your thinking and ways of working is very, very important for other human beings. There's that human connection that can help you achieve difficult things together, can make changes in kids' lives, can help teachers, can help leaders, can help community. And so I'd like to think that my legacy would be a demonstration that you can lead at very high levels and set vision for a system I'm most proud about, and do that with intelligence, integrity and kindness, and be authentic. You both know, because you've heard me speak before, I'm a crier, and I cry when I'm happy and I cry when I'm sad. And when I was a young woman, particularly a young leader, I used to feel very judged about that. You know, there are lots of people out there who think that if a woman cries, it's a sign of weakness. They don't understand that it is simply an emotional reaction to being happy or sad in my case. And I've always made the point that I can cry, but I can function and I can solve problems. And all it does is show someone that there is empathy there for a happy situation, a sad situation. So a long time ago, I accepted that my crying is for others to work with, not for me to change. And I think that legacy about being authentic, being kind, but being really driven about the main game, about the moral purpose, about those 800,000 children and young people that turn up every day. I need us to serve well. I would like to think that that might be the legacy I leave, but who knows? That's for others to decide, not me.
Certainly. I love that. I love that, you know, all the change that you make, you're pretty much saying I can do it whilst crying. You know, I
Absolutely.
can simultaneously,
It's true.
I can simultaneously look after all of these students,
Totally.
and I will do it while crying, and I won't apologize
No,
about it.
no,
To me,
it's
that's
absolutely right.
That's so powerful. As a fellow crier,
You got two on the
as
couch.
as a member of the crying club.
Yeah. Do you know, I did
Be with you, Deb.
I did a presentation to about 400 deputy principals at the end of last year, and several men came up to me and thanked me very much because they said, thank you for permission for me to be emotional. And thank you. One gentleman said, Deb, I cried listening to you give this talk about, and I used a particular example that always brings the house down with folk. I cry, they cry, everyone cries. This is a beautiful example about a young man and his journey through education. And he said, I haven't cried since my mum died, and I just cried, and I want to thank you for that. So sometimes people just need to get the permission to be authentic. And as I used to say to the kids at school, they would sit and tell you the most horrific stories, and we would cry together because it was sad and horrible. And then I'd say, okay, what are we going to do to sort this out together? How can I fix this? You know, and I think that's really important. You can't be something that you're not.
Your stories and the way you speak about your passion for education, I can't imagine a better person in the role that you're in at the moment and leading the way for us. It's inspiring to hear from you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for joining us. And to our listeners, to our viewers, please share this with someone who you think will benefit. I personally think it's for anyone. Can listen to this and feel inspired. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you. It's been my pleasure. And colleagues, if you ever see me or I'm out and about speaking, please come up and say hello. Always love to meet people who are new to the profession, early in the profession, just in the profession.
Yeah. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Teach New South Wales podcast, where we explore the dynamic world of education. Don't forget to follow, like and subscribe to be notified when new episodes become available. You can find us on social media via our handle @TeachNewSouthWales. Until next time, keep learning, keep teaching and keep making a difference. This podcast is produced by the Teach New South Wales team from the New South Wales Department of Education.